I've never told anyone this story before, just because it is so bizarre that nobody would ever believe me. I live in eastern Kentucky. In July of 2009, or maybe it was August, I went on a trip with some friends to the Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, Tennessee area for a few days. One day while we were there, we decided to go horseback riding at Smokey Mountain Riding Stables in Gatlinburg. We arrived early that morning, around 8 a.m. or so. We had made reservations ahead of time, but when we got there, they said they did not have our reservation listed, but could take us out anyway. The lady who took care of us seemed very nice and helpful. After getting ready and mounted up on our horses, she had asked us if any of us had ever ridden before. My friend Mark said he used to ride all the time as a kid. Myself and my other two friends, Michael and Don, hadn't really been around horses all that much. And as soon as everyone was mounted up, including the guide, off into the mountains we went. Now, it wasn't long after starting out until things started going wrong. My horse kept wanting to run off down steep hillsides instead of staying on the trail. When I tried pulling him back onto the trail, his bridle came loose from his mouth. The saddle horn broke, causing me to fall forward over the front end, then dragged through the woods by the reins. This continued for several minutes, even though others tried stopping their horses. Well, eventually, everything stopped suddenly. All four hooves hit the ground hard enough to shake the whole mountain, and suddenly, everything felt calm, like something strange had happened. There are many different trails leading through these mountains. Our group ended up being taken way off the main path where normal customers normally rode. This place looked more like an old Indian burial ground than anything else. Thick underbrush covered most areas, making it difficult to see far distances. Way across the clearing, I saw what looked like a wolf or dog sitting on its haunches, staring directly at us. Now, I pointed it out to my friends, but they said it was probably just someone's pet that had gotten loose. Then we heard strange howling coming from the woods all around us. It wasn't the normal sound you would expect to hear from wolves or dogs, more like something trying to imitate them. My horse started getting really nervous and wanted to bolt away, so I let him. After running about 100 yards, he stops suddenly, causing me to fly over his head into the brush. After standing up and brushing myself off, I realized no one else had followed. They were all still back where we first entered the clearing. Now, something didn't feel right about this place, so I decided to leave before anything worse had happened. I began walking towards the others when I hear this low growl behind me. I turned around to see this large, black canine creature standing there, red eyes glowing in the sunlight. It stood almost as tall as a moose, huge fangs hanging down on both sides of its mouth. Feeling scared half to death, I ran past it, hoping it wouldn't chase. My horse kept following alongside until I finally caught up with the rest of the group. Back at the stables, everyone asked why our clothing was torn and dirty. We told the lady who took care of us everything that had happened. She seemed concerned enough to call the police and tell them what had occurred. Now, I don't know if she ever did, since we never received any follow-ups. We went straight back to the hotel after leaving the stable and then stayed inside for the rest of the day. The following morning, we went home without saying goodbye to anyone. A few weeks after this, while visiting family members near Pikeville, Kentucky, I noticed a news article posted on the wall. Police were investigating possible animal attacks reported by local farmers. It seems several cows and horses were killed under mysterious circumstances. One farmer claimed to have seen giant wolf-like creatures prowling the area in the late night hours. Another said she witnessed the same thing attacking her livestock early in the morning. These reports reminded me exactly of what I experienced in the Smoky Mountains. Later, I learned that some people refer to these creatures as Dogman. I don't know much else other than the stories I've read online, but I would be very interested to hear if anyone else has experienced anything similar in this area. Here's the next story. I'm writing to you because I have been experiencing some strange things lately. First off, let me say that my wife and I are not easily spooked or prone to believing in the supernatural. We are both professionals who live a very comfortable life with our 2 children right near Knoxville, Tennessee. Now, my job takes me into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park frequently as part of my duties. Now, about 3 weeks ago, while on assignment at the park, I had an experience which was unusual but not explainable by natural means. So I did not think much of it until this past weekend when something else happened that really unnerved me. On September 10th, around noon, myself and another employee were working in the Cades Cove area of GSMNP, or Great Smoky Mountains National Park for short, doing maintenance work on one of the trails there. I'll give more details if needed. The weather was clear and sunny, with a temperature range being approximately around 73 to 76 degrees Fahrenheit. We finished up our task earlier than expected, so we decided to take advantage and do some hiking ourselves before heading back home for the day. We were walking along the Rich Mountain Loop Trail, heading west, taking photos occasionally. Since it was such a gorgeous place, nothing seemed out of place or different from any other visit here. The woods were quiet, except for the birds chirping away in the nearby treetops. Now, it must have been about a half an hour later when all sounds stopped suddenly, as if someone flipped a switch, turning them off. Immediately, I felt a chill, followed by a feeling like I was being watched. My colleague also felt the same way since he turned towards where the noise came from, asking, "What's going on?" Then everything returned back to normal just as quickly. Now, we shrugged it off, thinking maybe animals startled each other, causing the silence. And soon after resuming our hike, however, strange events started happening again. The first thing we noticed was a strong odor that hit both of us simultaneously, smelling similar to rotting flesh. Now, this lasted only a few seconds and then disappeared completely. Nothing visible explained the smell. A few minutes had passed without incident until we heard footsteps coming closer from behind us. As I turned around, expecting to see someone, no one was there. Only the sound of footsteps on leaves could be heard. No other sounds existed. My colleague also witnessed this event and became very concerned. We continued hiking in silence until reaching a point where the trail forked left and right. There were 2 benches located here, so we decided to take a break for lunch since it was now past noon. After eating sandwiches and drinking water, my friend stood up suddenly, pointing towards the tree line, exclaiming, "What is that?" I looked, but saw nothing unusual. He then told me he had seen something moving quickly between the tree line, like a large shadow. It seemed tall and skinny, wearing a long black cloak or robe with a hood covering its head. The movement lasted only a few seconds before vanishing. Now, my first thought was, it must have been another hiker wearing darker clothing, hiding among the trees, playing tricks. So I said to him, maybe it's just somebody messing with us. We both agreed, and it seemed to calm our nerves down, and we hiked back down as soon as possible without investigating further. Feeling strange the whole time, returning to the vehicle parked at the start of the trail. Now, not speaking much except for the occasional comment about the weather being lovely, I drove him home thinking about what had happened earlier, later discussing this incident with my wife, who, of course, did not believe the story. Well, later that evening, after dinner, while sitting in the living room watching TV, strange things started occurring again. Suddenly, the lights flickered several times, followed by a loud banging noise coming from upstairs in the bedroom. The cats ran downstairs, visibly shaken, scared, jumping onto our laps. Our dogs began barking uncontrollably, growling toward the ceiling area. And we could hear scratching noises above, along with stomping feet, making the entire floor shake. The door leading to the attic opened itself, slamming shut, causing everyone to jump. I grabbed a flashlight, heading upstairs, checking the rooms, finding nothing out of the ordinary. My wife, still skeptical, blamed it on a simple electrical issue, despite this never happening before. The pets calmed down eventually, but they still never acted normal. Now, this brings me to the current events, which occurred this weekend on October 1st. While visiting friends in Knoxville and staying overnight with our children at their grandparents', my wife and I went camping nearby in the national park, setting up camp near Abrams Creek Campground. We spent the day fishing, swimming, and relaxing, with the weather being warm and relatively sunny. As the evening arrived, we cooked dinner over the fire, enjoying ourselves, and soon after dark, at around 8:30 p.m., while sitting near the campfire roasting marshmallows, something caught my attention. My wife asked me what's wrong. I pointed toward the trees, explaining the movement I had seen a few minutes ago. She turned, looking in the same direction, but never saw anything unusual. Her disbelief frustrated me, so I stood up, walking closer towards the tree line, saying, "Watch this." As I reached the edge of the woods, the lights flickered off and on several times, followed by a loud crashing noise coming from within. This made my wife scream, grabbing onto me, begging to leave the area immediately. I did not hesitate, gathering our things as quickly as possible, packing the vehicle, and heading home without further incident. We have since avoided going back to that park, preferring to stay away for now. My job does require occasional visits there, however, always during daytime hours only, never alone any longer. Even writing this letter makes me feel uneasy about what happened, as it brings me right back. I'm hoping there's somebody out there who has experienced something similar. Here's the next story. I live in eastern Tennessee, not far from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I have a small farm where I raise cattle for beef production. On this particular evening, I was walking around my property to check on some of the animals before heading back into town for an appointment. As it got dark outside, since it gets pretty dark out here, I decided to walk up one of our fields with a flashlight to see if there were any predators lurking about that could harm our livestock or even myself. As you know, we've had problems with black bear overpopulation as well as coyotes. Now, I'm originally from Minnesota and am very familiar with wolves, so they don't really concern me much. But these eastern coyotes are something else. Anyway, after checking out most of my field by shining my light at different areas where an animal might be hiding or stalking, I didn't find anything worth worrying about. Though, when doing this kind of thing, you can never let your guard down. As it started getting later in the night, however, things took a turn towards being really strange. First off, all lights went out suddenly across a half-mile radius surrounding us due to a power outage caused by a severe storm, which also made heavy rain pour down rapidly. Secondly, the only sound heard during the whole time while electricity was gone came from what seemed like loud noises emanating somewhere close by. It couldn't have been any more than 50 yards away at max. Now, thirdly, every single cow began bellowing loudly and continuously non-stop until morning arrived. Afterwards, the cows acted strangely, They acted extremely skittish and refused to leave the barns. For the last 2 days, they haven't eaten or drunk water since the incident occurred. Do you think whatever the creature was making those sounds is responsible for why the animals are still terrified? Now, this has scared the heck out of me because it's completely unexplainable and everything happened way too fast. Then again, I did get the feeling of a presence of an evil force lurking in the vicinity, and I just wanted to go home as quickly as possible. Now I'm wondering whether I'll ever return to a normal life. Here's the next story. This incident I'm about to describe happened in the summer of 1977 when I was a child. It took place at my grandparents' farm near Brownsville, Kentucky. The house and property were built on land that had been owned by our family for generations. The house was very old and had this eerie feeling to it. There were several stories of strange occurrences there over the years, but this is what happened during one particular visit. Now, I should note that my grandparents didn't have any neighbors nearby, so we would spend most of our time exploring around their large piece of property or even fishing in the pond behind their home. On this day, while we were playing down by the creek, which ran through part of their land, something caught my eye on top of the hill across from us. There appeared to be some sort of animal standing next to the tree line, just watching us play below. We could see it clearly because it stood out against the background. It looked like a big black dog with long, shaggy hair. But then, as quickly as it came into view, it vanished. Now, as soon as this occurred, both my cousin and I began screaming and running back towards Grandma's. My grandfather had heard all the commotion coming from outside. He met us halfway between the front door where he'd been working out back. Well, naturally, he wanted to know why we were carrying on so much, and we told him what had happened. His face turned white when he heard the description. He just told us, "You kids need to get inside now." Then he went to grab his shotgun before heading off into the woods. Now, you need to understand how unusual such a reaction was for our grandfather. He never showed fear of anything. So the fact that he would arm himself made me realize that whatever creature we had seen must have really spooked him. Anyway, a few moments later, we heard shots ring out. Then after a little while longer, he returned, saying nothing else. At the dinner table, Grandma asked if either of us saw a coyote or a wolf running loose around the area, but Grandfather just shook his head no. He said it wasn't a wild canine causing trouble, but something else entirely. Then, nervously, he changed the subject. Now, as far as I know, no one ever saw it again, but I do remember Grandpa was on edge for the rest of that day. He even made sure the doors were locked before we went to bed, which, again, never happened. Now, I don't know if it was a Dogman or not. I just remember being scared to death when my cousin and I saw that thing standing up on the hillside, watching us play down by the creek. It seemed like we were frozen in place for a few seconds, until it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Now, I do believe in supernatural entities, so anything is possible. The house where this happened also gave me an eerie feeling whenever we visited our grandparents there. There were several stories of strange occurrences over the years from other various family members who had lived there or spent time at the farm. One story in particular involved my great aunt seeing a shadowy apparition walking through her bedroom one evening. There's another story with my grandfather hearing someone whispering his name while he was working outside late one evening. And then there's another one about someone banging loudly on all four sides of their house during the early morning hours. I know there are many more tales they have told me over the years, but those ones stand out to me. Now, I also am aware that there are old, desecrated Indian burial mounds nearby, but how far, I'm not exactly sure, and how many, I don't know. So, what did we see? Was this a creature? Was this a supernatural entity? I don't know for certain, but I've spent some more time reading about cryptids and trying to study this strange phenomena, and well, let's just say that the possibility exists. Nowadays, when I visit this farm, I always try to make sure I have a camera along with me and just, well, a little bit more awareness. If I'm able to capture anything, you'll be the first person I send it to. Stay safe. Here is the next story. I'm the person who had this experience. My cousin actually informed me about your YouTube, so I'm emailing you to let others know about it. Now, my husband and my friend, who also lived on our property for a time, witnessed it as well. Here's what it was. A 7-foot-tall, gray creature with wings. Yes, it looked like leather bat's wings, but with webbing between finger-like bones, extending from the neck area of its body down into the upper thigh area. Now, I do not recall seeing talons, a tail, or horn-like things sticking out from the head area. My sighting took place at night when we were going through the woods, through the trees around our front yard. This thing swooped down towards us while letting off a sort of screeching noise. It seemed very angry and aggressive and made me feel extremely uneasy. This thing flies up high after I fired my pistol 2 times into the air, then suddenly stops as if deciding what to do next. Was it scared? Was it worried? Then it silently watched us for a short time before gliding away slowly over the top of the tree line, heading in a northeastern direction. While standing there watching it glide, I did take notice of how big the wingspan was. Meanwhile, my husband and friend who were beside the vehicle were yelling, "Run back inside! Run back inside the house now!" It vanished quickly due to heavy clouds overhead, but the moonlight reflecting was enough light on the creature that we could see everything perfectly. Because even though it was cloudy, there were enough breaks in the clouds where light would illuminate through onto this thing. Now, it's not like we got a great look at it for a long while. It was a few seconds, but as I said, those few seconds were enough to get more than enough of a look. And I got to see a good look at the whole figure. And I could tell you folks here today, this thing is neither the Mothman nor some giant owl or bird, just being seen as something other than a normal wild animal. The coloration seems wrong, though, because no actual bats have the exact coloration that this critter appeared to have. We would later dub him the vampire. My guess is that it's pale gray, maybe blended with lighter yellowish or whitish hues, which stood out even more under the bright moon. So go ahead, laugh all you want, because I know it sounds crazy. No one wants to believe these stories anyway. But maybe in hearing this, somebody will come forward providing a better description, possibly evidence or pictures or video. Do people even know that these things exist outside of legend, lore, and fantasy? I wish my husband was still alive because he would testify that it's all true in a heartbeat. I am writing to you about a Bigfoot sighting that my father had here in Kentucky. It was around 1968 or 69 during his summer break from college. Now, he worked for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources as an animal tracker and lived in Lexington, which is in central Kentucky. So he traveled all over the state. Now, he came across what looked like large tracks around Pine Mountain State Park, and then started hearing some strange noises further out in the woods. As days went by while checking traps, he noticed those traps were getting mangled up pretty badly, and they were bear-proof. Then, one evening, he and 2 other workers who also stayed with him heard something go after the trash cans behind their cabin. When they rushed outside with guns, there was no sign of anyone. But it did not take long before this being showed itself right near their door. There's a bright light there due to security reasons. They saw more than just its shape because that thing spent about 30 minutes going through the trash searching for food leftovers. Now, Dad has done much tracking of wildlife like bears and wolves for research purposes too. So, based on the size and body movements and mannerisms, his best guess would be that it was Bigfoot, aka Sasquatch or Yeti. But yet again, how does one really know for sure? Well, we don't. All I can tell you here is that the stories passed down within the family circle have been proven true, even if hard to believe them at first. Now, I do apologize if this comes off as a bit confusing or messed up sounding. My dad had this Bigfoot sighting, except instead of a gun, he had taken along his hunting bow with him. He thought it would be a good idea to have some additional protection and hoped that it would be enough if there was any kind of real threat posed by whatever came after their trash. Now, as I stated earlier, I've heard these stories many times since my childhood years, but only recently did I find out about the one of a close family friend who had also experienced something very similar when staying alone in our cabin in the late 90s. They are a local plumber for over 25 plus years and are considered a very honest and reliable person. So I have no reason to believe they just made this story up or exaggerated it. One evening, just before the dark, they went inside, knowing the sun would soon go down. The dog kept barking outside at who knows what, then began howling. Now, nobody else lived nearby because the closest house was well over a mile away, and so Dad asked him what was going on. He said it must have been a bear. I told you to never leave garbage cans around without properly securing them from those things. I did not see it myself because his tone and voice sounded rather shaky, which got him worried. Now, the next morning, shortly after sunrise, they went together back outside, finding the canister tipped over. It looked pretty beaten up as well, and I asked if this could have been done by people, maybe vandalizing the property. But no, because both motion lights were turned on, most likely meaning something might get caught. Now, whoever or whatever destroyed the trash can during the night sure showed there's nothing to worry about. I will say that I do not believe that what my father experienced or what the family friend experienced was a supernatural occurrence. I think it is more likely that they saw something like Bigfoot, which many people have reported seeing in Kentucky. Now, it's always possible that there is some sort of undiscovered animal out there. There are so many remote parts of the world where creatures could be hiding, but no one ever sees them because humans don't venture into those areas often. But I'm also open to the possibility that these sightings were hoaxes or misunderstandings. It's hard to say for sure without concrete evidence, but I lean more on my dad being honest. Here's the next story. I was looking at a case that was posted from about a 2008 sighting in Ohio County, Kentucky. Now, I have seen what I believe to be the same thing around Owensboro, Kentucky, which is roughly 40 miles away from where this took place, and I am writing to tell you my story. I had an experience with something very similar on March 9th of 2013. It was late evening, and it was just starting to get dark out when my wife and I were driving down Highway 60 east towards our home in Owensboro, Kentucky. We saw a strange light off in the distance that looked like it was hanging very low over some trees next to a farm field. The light appeared white, but also had this blue hue to it as well. Now, as we got closer, we noticed that there were two other lights side by side instead of just the one, and they were also very large, and they appeared to be almost pulsating or throbbing slightly. They seemed much too big for an airplane or a helicopter, so we thought maybe it could be a hot air balloon. Now, as we continued getting closer, the road would naturally curve left and then straighten back out again before curving right into another curve further up ahead. So after coming out of that first curve, the object should have been directly in front of us. But when we came around that second curve, expecting to see it directly ahead, there was nothing there. Now, we both found this very strange, since whatever it was would have had to go straight through those curves, if not follow them even more than us, because of how close above the tree line they appeared. So, unless they suddenly shot upwards very fast, or just vanished completely within seconds while still remaining below treetop level, then they must have turned somehow without going off course, since they weren't visible any longer, even though no time at all had passed between us seeing them initially and reaching that point where they should have been directly ahead. Anyway, after not seeing anything else unusual during our drive home, besides being spooked a little bit by what we had seen, we just went on with our evening as usual and didn't think much more about it until later on. That's when I read an article online that talked about a UFO sighting in Ohio County, Kentucky from 2008, which described something similar to what we saw. And that's when I began thinking that maybe it wasn't a balloon after all, or anything else easily explainable. I've never seen anything like this before and haven't since, but I thought you might find it interesting, especially since the other case happened so close to where this occurred.